a magia do futebol. Somos diferentes, mas torcer nos faz parecidos. Não importa se você assiste com a camisa da sorte, no bar com amigos ou em casa na poltrona.
Preparou, vai bater, pegou! Gol!
Se você é o que grita mais alto, o que só comemora depois do replay, cada um torce do seu jeito. Coca-Cola, torcer é pra todos.
Não é tempo técnico, mas é intervalo aqui no podcast. Já imaginou se seu time tivesse um seguro para não perder nunca? Pois é, isso não existe. Mas com a Zurich Seguros, quem não perde nunca é você. Na Zurich Seguros, os planos se adequam às suas necessidades em qualquer momento da sua vida. Seja seguro de auto, residência, vida e muito mais. Diferente de alguns times, na Zurich Seguros você pode confiar. Para saber mais, acesse zurich.com.br ou consulte seu corretor.
The following is a presentation of News Radio, KMAN, your home for high school sports. This is Scoreboard Saturday on News Radio, KMAN.
Glad to be back with you again on this Saturday morning. News Radio KMAN. AJ Shaw with you on what is going to be a busy day for myself. Right after this, I'll be headed over to Rock Creek with Troy Coverdale for high school playoff football. Of course, the Rock Creek Holcomb game pushed back from last evening due to some of the severe storms in the area. And we'll have that game for you on B1047. Pregame gets started at 10:30 with kickoff at 11 from Flush. Rock Creek and Holcomb in the 3A West playoffs. Rock Creek trying to pick up a regional. Of course, a lot of other big games going on last night in our show brought to you by WTC Communications. WTC keeping you connected with the fastest fiber network internet speeds. Get your home or business in the game online at WTCKS.com. That's WTCKS.com. We start, of course, off in 6A this week with the Manhattan Indians, who took on Avery Johnson's alum last night, the Mays Redhawks. Not sure if Avery was in attendance or not. I did not get a chance to see. Maybe Mitch Fortner will mention it in his wrap. But Manhattan looking for another regional title, looking to keep the unbeaten season going, coming in at 8-0, and possibly even another shutout. They have 4 shutouts on the season. They had one last week in their victory over Wichita North, and an opportunity to play a very good Wichita Northwest team that won on Thursday night. Could Manhattan pull it off? Well, Mitch Fortner, could they?
The Manhattan High Indians last night, in the rain and in the wind, did something that hasn't been done in 36 years. Manhattan this season now has 5 shutouts that has not been done since 1988. As last night at Bishop Stadium, the Indians of Manhattan take down the Mays Eagles, 49-0 for Manhattan's 10th win of the season. Mitch Fortner alongside Cole Dutchendorf. Manhattan once again, Cole dominates an opponent. However, last night, very notable game for Carter Aslan, a career day on the ground, and for the team running the football, the best performance of the season.
Yeah, 465 rushing yards overall, and Aslan, he had his career high by the first half. He had 215 rushing yards in the first half alone, ended with 224 on just 14 carries. That's good for 16 yards per carry. Also had 3 touchdowns on the ground. Jaden Hudley, 15 carries, 151 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Max Evans-Pryor, 3 carries for 33 yards and a touchdown. Finn Watson had 5 carries for 10 yards. E.J. Massenberg, 5 carries for 28 yards. And Gabe Summerlin, 1 carry, 19 yards. 43 carries for Manhattan, 465 yards on the ground, as well as 7 rushing touchdowns through the air. Carter Aslan was 1 for 4 for 3 yards. Finn Watson, the backup, 2 for 2 for 21. So total yardage for Manhattan, 489. And then for Mays, 101 total yards on the night, 91 on the ground. It was Braden Mayovella. He had 4 rushes for 16 yards. Shannon Jones, 9 carries, 39 yards. Elijah Cross, 7 carries for 32 yards. And Bryson Hayes, their star wide receiver, had a couple of carries for 4 yards. 22 carries for 91 yards on the ground. And then Mayovella through the air, 6 for 15 for just 21 yards. Again, total yards for Mays, 101 compared to the 489 for Manhattan.
So with the win for Manhattan, it's now 4 consecutive years that the Indians move on to the sectional round, the round of 8 for the 6A state playoffs. And with this win, Manhattan has their 10th 10-win season in program history. It's the 6th under Joe Schartz. And, of course, now we know that Manhattan will have a rematch with Wichita Northwest next Friday night. Manhattan played the Grizzlies earlier this year back on October 11th, and the Indians beat Wichita Northwest 38-17. The winner of that game going to the sub-state championship game. Manhattan now 10-0, and Mays ends their season with a record of 5-5. Manhattan wins its regional round game over Mays last night, 49-0 for Cole Dutchendorf. I'm Mitch Fortner for Scoreboard Saturday.
And thank you very much, Mitch and Cole. The Indians, as mentioned, pick up their 5th shutout victory of the season, and they'll play Wichita Northwest in a rematch. And, of course, the winner of that game will play either Derby or Wichita East. Have to assume it's probably going to be Derby. They're 10-0. Could be another Manhattan Derby playoff rematch in the postseason. Seems like every year these two teams come together in 6A West. I mean, it makes sense. They've been longtime rivals, and, of course, Manhattan High putting themselves in that position as they will either take on one of those two teams if they can beat a very good Wichita Northwest team, which is the 3 seed in 6A West. Joe Schartz following the win last evening.
You said going into this game, this might be the best offense you've seen this year. You get your 5th shutout of the year. Just how'd you do it?
Well, we mixed up the looks and really put a lot of pressure on that quarterback, and the kids got home with the game plan, and Coach Aslan did a nice job of mixing things up and bringing pressure and then showing some coverage, and we never let them get going. That was the key.
Does it surprise you at this point just how dominant the defense continues to be? Does it still surprise you even when you play a team like this?
It does, but you throughout the course of the week you got to keep that edge. You got to stay motivated, and so sometimes I guess my wife just told me I'm the guy that cries wolf every week, but that's what we have to do. We just can't overlook anybody at this point, and we got to go out and play great football every Friday night. And so I told the kids how proud I was of them for this victory, and this was a hot football team that came in and they were a 5-game win streak with a lot of talent, and our kids played great football tonight, and very proud of them.
What was the message to the guys after just such a dominant performance?
Well, I just told them I hope that they are enjoying the ride. We have our sights set so high that every now and then you need to just stop and enjoy this, and because it's a memorable ride, and they're making memories with their friends and the kids that they've grown up with, and the kids that they've gone to school with, and representing their hometown. There's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. I don't care about going to college and making NIL or playing wherever. There's nothing like high school football and playing with your friends on Friday night.
Bryson Hayes is one of the best wide receivers in the nation for this year's class, the class of 2025, and he really didn't get going at all tonight. I know you kind of hinted at that a little bit earlier, but what was the game plan and how well did you guys execute it?
Did well. A lot of it's just, we knew where he was going to be. We had to know where number one was going to be all the time because he was the other threat on the field besides the quarterback, and so we never left him without help. The guy that had him always had a safety over the top, so we double covered him all night and single covered the rest of the guys, and the rest is history.
A couple of milestones tonight. There was actually a whole bunch of milestones, but just running the football, your team had the most rushing yards this season. You crushed the previous number, and then also Carter Aslan had a career night, and actually in the first half of his rushing yards. You haven't really had to have him throw the football lately. That running game just does not slow down.
Well, it's good, and the kids are executing up front. O-line's doing a good job, and we spent a lot of time this week. It was we didn't know whether or not they've shown some different looks. We didn't know if it was going to be an odd front or an even front. So we had to work about 3 different fronts this week, and it really challenged the kids. But I think it's going to help us in the future. And the kids are continually getting better every week and learning more and communicating. And you see that execution out on the field with the run game. But passing game, we're going to have to throw the ball, and we're going to have to get better. So. That's still an area of concern.
All right, I'll tell you 2 more things, and you can give me your reaction to these 2 things. 1, 10 wins on the year. It's the 10th time in program history that's happened. You have 6 of those seasons. And then the shutouts. 5 shutouts this season, first time since 1988. Those are 2 pretty big deals.
Yeah, and the shutouts are nice, and you know, I'm glad we got the running clock there at the end. The running clock was big here with the rain, the storms, because shortly after the game it just started pouring, and so it was nice, and it also helped us to preserve that shutout at the end. So that's something that we wanted. It's a goal of the kids, and we were able to preserve that shutout. It's fantastic.
All right, well, then I'll wrap it up on this, maybe a more critical question of the whole interview here. So right before the half, 2-minute drill, didn't use your timeouts. You got it inside the 45, and you decided to run out the rest of the clock. You just thought at that point it was already a blowout? Or
it was more. We wanted to go ahead and get some more points there, but you know, the play before just didn't materialize. You know, it didn't go as far as we wanted to, and so it was just like, hey, you know, we don't have to get points here, so let's just run the clock out and go to half. But you know, I want to make a point here. We have a foreign exchange student on the team, Henry Genowit, and absolutely doesn't have any football experience at all. And usually when you get a foreign exchange student, they know how to kick because they're soccer players, you know. But Henry doesn't have any football experience at all. But Henry was able to get on a kickoff late in the game and make a tackle. So that's why, you know, the kids were very excited about that. And that's something that Henry's going to be able to take home with him, you know, after his experience as a foreign exchange student and playing, you know, football in America.
All right, Coach, appreciate your time. We'll talk to you next week.
Yep, thank you.
Head coach Joe Schartz, Manhattan High, wins it over Mays as they move on again to play Wichita Northwest early in the season. Mitch mentioned in his wrap-up there, the 2 teams met early in the season on October the 11th, and Manhattan was able to pull away with the victory. It's a pretty good Manhattan team. This defense is probably better than the 2022 version, and the offense for sure. But Mitch mentioned that game on the 11th of October. That was a big ball game if you remember coming in, and Manhattan was still able to win it by 3 touchdowns, 38-17 over Wichita Northwest. Although when you look at Manhattan's wins this year, their closest victories, 10-point win over Lawrence Free State, 4-point win over Hayes. Remember that dramatic finish. They scored with 2 seconds left. And then a 21-point win over Wichita Northwest. The third closest victory for Manhattan was the Wichita Northwest game. Last year when Manhattan faced Derby in the 3rd round, that was a rematch of the first game of the season. I'm not saying Manhattan's going to lose. I'm just saying definitely something to keep an eye on. But Wichita Northwest is no slouch, and they're 9-1 for a reason. Their lone loss coming to Manhattan. We mentioned Derby, of course, playing Wichita East. Derby winning last night over Junction City, so the Blue Jays season comes to an end at 5-5, 42-14 the final, as Derby will host Wichita East next week. They take down Dodge City on Thursday by a final of 21-17. I mentioned Wichita Northwest beat Wichita South Thursday 62-28. So if you look at that side of the bracket right now, you got Derby and Wichita East, Manhattan and Wichita Northwest. Of course, the winner would play each other in Derby, in Sub-State, 2 weeks from last night, the 22nd of November, with a chance to go to the state championship game in Hutchinson the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Again, Manhattan had to beat Derby in 2022 to win the state title. Last year, Derby kicks a almost last-second field goal. I think there was like maybe 20 seconds left in that game. They kicked a last-second field goal pretty much near the end of that game and were able to take them out. So Manhattan wins another regional championship. Make that now 3 years in a row that Manhattan has won the regional championship. Manhattan did play Wichita Northwest in the playoffs 2 years ago during their championship run and won 27-18 before taking on Derby in the postseason, and they were able to beat Derby and then beat Gardner-Edgerton in double overtime to win the state championship. So a lot of parallels to that 2022 season. On the eastern side of the bracket, speaking of Gardner-Edgerton, they're moving on to the sectionals next week as they defeat Blue Valley Northwest by a final score of 42-7. Or they're going to play Blue Valley Northwest. They beat Shawnee Mission East by a final of 42-7 last night. Lawrence Free State, they played Blue Valley Northwest, and Blue Valley Northwest, since I spoiled it, picks up a 49-14 victory. You have Blue Valley Northwest and Gardner-Edgerton as a battle between a 1 and a 4 seed next week. Gardner-Edgerton 9-1, Blue Valley Northwest 7-3. Blue Valley West, the 2 seed over on the eastern portion of the 6A bracket. They take down Olathe Northwest by a 40-7 score. They'll play Shawnee Mission Northwest next week, who beat Olathe East 21-7. So Blue Valley West and Shawnee Mission Northwest battling on that side with Gardner Edgerton and Blue Valley Northwest. We could see a Manhattan Gardner Edgerton rematch in the state championship game, depending on how these results go. When we come back, we head out to 5A and 4A, particularly Wamego, as they were able to pick up another regional title in their quest for a state championship. We discuss more coming next here on Scoreboard Saturday, powered by WTC Communications.
Meu nome é Cairo Santos e eu sou kicker e único brasileiro jogando na NFL. Cada chute, cada jarda conquistada, cada passo me levou para mais perto dos meus sonhos. Agora, a cada R$200 em compras com seu Visa cadastrado, você tem a chance de ficar mais perto do sonho de assistir ao Super Bowl 59. E usando o seu cartão de débito, você ainda concorre a prêmios diários de até R$1.000. Não importa o tamanho do seu sonho, dê o primeiro passo. Visa, apoiando seus passos aonde você quiser chegar.
We continue here on Scoreboard Saturday, News Radio KMAN. AJ Shaw with you here. It's actually kind of nice to be talking some high school sports after a lengthy political week here at News Radio KMAN. Another election season done. Really appreciate the great team that we've put together here at Manhattan Broadcasting here at KMAN and also with the Manhattan Mercury. I thought we had some great coverage this year covering the races. A lot of change in Riley County as some big races being called this year. But obviously, folks listening to this show don't want to hear more about that. They want to hear what's going on in the world of high school football as we look quickly here at 5A following the games last evening. Over on the eastern portion of the bracket, St. Thomas Aquinas remains unbeaten. They defeat Pittsburgh by a final score of 28-14, the top seed in 5A East. They downed Pittsburgh last evening, and they'll take on Mill Valley. Mill Valley, the defending champs in 5A, will continue their title defense. They win at 42-6 over Spring Hill last night. So a good ball game in Aquinas next week in KC, as we will see a 10-0 St. Thomas Aquinas team taking on a 9-1 Mill Valley team. Again, Mill Valley, the defending champions in 5A, trying to keep that title defense going, and they're going to have a tough test against St. Thomas Aquinas. We mentioned, of course, Blue Valley North, a team that went into DeSoto last week and upset the Tigers 34-27. They go to Leavenworth last night and pick up another upset. The 15-seeded Blue Valley North, the Bears, they're able to pick up, pardon me, they're not the Bears. Whew, that was a mistake right there. Pardon me. I don't know why. It was stuck in my head there. They're able to upset Leavenworth last evening, who was the 10 seed. They had beaten Washington the previous week. Blue Valley North wins it 41-14, and they're moving on to take on St. James Academy next week. St. James Academy upsetting Baser Linwood last night, 37-19. They're at 500 out of Lenexa. St. James Academy, who at times this year looked really rough. Yeah, they played some tighter and tougher competition, but they've really kind of had a good run here through the 5A playoffs. So it'll be a 3-7 Blue Valley North team and a 5-5 St. James Academy team in the sectional next week. Hayes picking up an upset on the western portion of the bracket last night. Top-seeded Great Bend, they're out. 19-14. Hayes gets the upset win on the road at Great Bend, and they'll play Hutchinson next week, who beat Liberal on Thursday, 33-13. So Hutchinson gets the home game next week instead of what they were expecting to be a road game against Great Bend. Hayes and Hutchinson, the battle next week. Goddard Eisenhower taking down Mays South in their ball game, 37-26 Thursday, and their opponent will be Topeka Seaman, who beat Valley Center, who was able to upset Goddard the previous week, 43-15. So Goddard Eisenhower and Topeka Seaman do battle, along with Hayes and Hutchinson on the western portion of the 5A bracket. We move over now to 4A. We mentioned Wamego picking up the regional title. We'll start off on the 4A West side of the bracket, Wamego last night taking down McPherson in a game that was quite tough for Wamego early throughout that ball game. McPherson played them tough, but in the end, a Tate Warren touchdown late in that ball game gives Wamego the 7-point advantage, 20-13. So for Wamego, 3 consecutive regional titles in 4A West, and they move on to play Buhler next week, and that will be our B1047 Carpet One of Manhattan area game of the week next week. Wamego and Buhler from Wamego High School. Why is Buhler in this game? Well, they took down Mulvane on Thursday night by a 62-21 final. Buhler at 7-2 coming into that one, now at 8-2. Wamego sitting at 9-1. But I mentioned this on the show last week when we were talking Wamego. Andover Central, the team that knocked Wamego out of the playoffs last season, well, they're just a step closer to potentially rematching Wamego a couple of weeks from now. On Thursday, Andover Central defeating Winfield by a 35-7 tally, and they'll play Wellington next week, who won a tight ball game over Cape and Mount Carmel 20-19 on Thursday. So Andover Central, Wellington, Wamego, Buhler on the 4A West side, and again, we could see a 4th straight postseason matchup between Wamego and Andover Central, and a 2nd straight year those two teams meet in the Sub-State Championship with an opportunity to head to Hutchinson for the 4A state title the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Big thing to keep an eye on for sure with Andover Central as we look back at some of the different things that are going to be going on throughout the whole season when it comes to a lot of the different aspects and other stuff like that. 4A East, Atchison out. The top seed is out. Atchison losing last night to a 5-4 Lansing team by a final of 23-15. They'll take on Tonganoxie, who was able to pick up the road win over Fort Scott last evening. Big deal. Big deal for sure. And we talked about it really with Tonganoxie. They're able to play a Lansing team that went into Atchison and beat a top seed. These upsets, as we get into the regionals, for sure are a big deal. Bishop Miege, another team that was a 15 seed beating a Lewisburg team, they're moving up. Labette County, who came in at 5-4, they had beaten Sumner Academy in a battle of a couple of 4-4 squads. Bishop Miege will play Chanute next week after they take down Labette County, as I mentioned, 34-6 in Altamont. Chanute beating Ottawa by a 30-0 final. That's a shutout there. So Bishop Miege, who was 1-7, very surprising. You don't see many Bishop Miege teams going 1-7 in their history. They'll play Chanute next week. Wamego, of course, as I mentioned, will play Buhler, Andover Central against Wellington, and Lansing against Tonganoxie. Definitely some prizes on the 4A bracket for sure, and that is something to definitely keep an eye on as we continue throughout the postseason. We saw the surprise in 5A, of course, but a lot of the big things to keep an eye on. Definitely, we need to make sure to keep an eye on that Andover Central-Wamego rematch potentially. That could be a rematch. Wamego again next week. They're playing Buhler. That's a big ball game to keep an eye on. And Andover Central, we could definitely see 4 straight years of Wamego in the postseason. When we come back, we'll look ahead for Brock Creek's ball game as they look to try to win a regional title in 3A West. That's all coming your way next here on Scoreboard Saturday, powered by WTC Communications. I'm a little embarrassed by that. I completely blanked and forgot. Yeah, it's Rock Creek and Holcomb. I do know they're playing Holcomb today, folks. Back here on News Radio KMAN, Scoreboard Saturday again. Pre-game is at 10:30. Kickoff at 11 here on, over on B1047. Our Carpet One of Manhattan area game of the week, Rock Creek and Holcomb. Sometimes your brain just freezes on you like that, and that's what ended up happening for me right there. But yeah, Rock Creek and Holcomb in the 3A West playoffs. Last week, of course, Rock Creek, they got to a running clock in their ball game. They were able to pick up the victory as they were able to down a pretty tough opponent coming into that ball game, but were able to pick up the victory. Rock Creek right now in a pretty good position with the home playoff game. Again, Holcomb, the reason why they moved that game back was because of the travel mainly. Holcomb had a 4.5-hour trip, so that's why they were in the position they were in to move that game back with some of the storms we got last evening. But Rock Creek coming off the win over Smoky Valley last week, 51-8. No Mac Lee again at quarterback. He's been dealing with that knee injury. So Gavin Rosa gets the start again today in the playoff game that starts at 11 out in Flush. Ever since Rosa has taken over at the quarterback position, 8 touchdowns for him passing. He had the 5-touchdown game in the final game of the season against Chapman, the game that we had, and then had 3 in the victory last week. Rock Creek has definitely changed their offense up a little bit since they moved to Gavin Rosa following the Mac Lee injury. They had some injuries, of course, at running back. And what's been impressive with Rock Creek, too, is defensively, this is a football team that is very, very physical. Maybe not as physical as Wamigo's defense is, but regardless, this is a very good football team that really keeps you off the scoreboard and makes it very tough for you to score against them. And this is a team that's been on a real good position really since they had the injury to Drew Becker. They lost that game, you remember, in Wamego 20-0. Becker goes out, you're like, uh-oh, there goes their running game. But they've had Jordy Scott step in for them at the running back position. They've had some play from Zion Bell, who is Eli Bell's younger brother. But the passing game has definitely been a huge factor for them ever since Rosa took over at the quarterback position. He's not as much of a dual threat as Mac Lee is. Mac Lee is definitely more of a run-first quarterback. But when it comes to Rock Creek, they have definitely fixed their offense, or I shouldn't say fixed their offense. Their offense has changed a lot ever since Mac Lee went out. And Mac Lee was a big part of their offense. He was their leading guy when it came to total yardage. He had over 1,000 yards close to. So really, in a big situation for Rock Creek, they've gotten it from Gavin Rosa. He has been a very capable quarterback, and they've seen it before from him. But looking at Rock Creek, I mean, you look at their margins of victory. 56 over Bishop Ward, 57 over Bonner Springs, 36 over Abilene, 21 over Clay Center, 17 over a Marysville team who was red hot coming into that game, 42 over Concordia, 63 over Chapman, 43 over Smoky Valley. Now they play a Holcomb team that comes in at 7-2 for the season, 3-1 in district play. They're 5-1 in the Greater West Activities Conference, coming off of a win in Holcomb over Marysville, 12-7 last night, the Longhorns. They haven't had many dominant victories like Rock Creek has. They lost their first game of the season to Cheney by a score of 38-7. Then they went on a 3-game winning streak. They go to Scott City. They actually played Scott City at home, and they get shut out 9-0. Then their last 3 games, 32-6 win over Hugoton, 35-0 over Southwestern Heights, and 12-7 over Holcomb. This is a team whose defense is very solid. They're going to keep you to a very low score. In fact, the only game this year they've given up outside of the Cheney game over 20 points was a game against Goodland, Lincoln Cure's team, 35-21. Good news, by the way, with Lincoln Cure. He is not going to be visiting Oregon this weekend. Canceled that trip, so good news for K-State fans. So Trey Teeter's team, they're very good at keeping you to very low scoring. So we may not see a lot of scoring in this ball game today. However, the pass offense is the key for them, for Rock Creek, and that's going to be something to keep an eye on as we continue throughout this game. But again, Holcomb is one of those teams that if they have to beat you 12-7, they're going to do that. They're absolutely going to do that. If they have to blow you out like they did against Goodland or have a high-scoring game sort of, 35-21, they'll do it. But they really haven't had to face a tough team since the Cheney game. Yeah, they played Scott City. Scott City's a pretty solid team, but they're not a Cheney. Cheney is one of the top teams in the state of Kansas when you look at it in the great scheme of things. Yeah, Scott City's a pretty good team, but they only held them to 9 points. Holcomb's defense can definitely keep Rock Creek to a very low score or potentially off the scoreboard. So definitely something to keep an eye on as we head into today's ball game. As for other games that went on in 3A last evening on the eastern portion of the 3A bracket, Wellsville able to shut out Holton by a 49-0 season. Disappointing season for Holton comes to an end. They go 5-5. Prairie View, meanwhile, defeating Columbus in a battle of 7-2 teams. Prairie View, a 34-13 win last evening. So it'll be Wellsville, the unbeaten team at 10-0 against Prairie View next week. Perry-LeCompton upsets an unbeaten Frontenac team who was a 2 seed on the eastern portion of the 3A bracket, 28-22. Perry-LeCompton was a 3-5 football team coming into postseason, just squeaked their way in as a 10 seed, and they've won back-to-back road playoff games, but their test gets tougher next week as they take on a Topeka-Hayden team who blew out Girard last evening by a final of 49-0. Yeah, Frontenac was tough. Topeka High is just as tough as well. But Perry Lecompton has definitely been the cause throughout the postseason, have been a big surprise. As for Andale, they were able to blow out Clay Center on Thursday, 74-0. That game wasn't even close, as Andale will play their rivals, Cheney, next week after Cheney beat Wichita Collegiate 14-0. You think some of those players that were on that Andale team last year were thinking about that game? Ooh, yeah, they're definitely thinking about that ball game. So something to definitely keep an eye on as, Andale wants revenge over Cheney. If you remember, Cheney ended their long winning streak and also beat him in the postseason. Cheney at 9-1, Andale at 10-0. That could be the game of the week. And, of course, whoever wins the Rock Creek Holcomb game today, they're playing Scott Community High School next week, who was able to beat Heston 9-7. Very low-scoring game. But it's going to be a defensive football game, you have to think, today. These are two teams that are playing a very early game. They got to get their minds prepared, the early wake-up. It's going to be a defensive football game, I feel. So, again, don't miss that game. That's going to be over on B1047, our Carpet One of Manhattan area game of the week over on B1047. That's a 10:30 pregame with kickoff at 11. Myself and Troy Coverdale on the call for that as Manhattan High in a pretty good position right now. Or not Manhattan. Why am I saying Manhattan High? All over the place today. Rock Creek in a pretty good position potentially to get themselves a home playoff game once again next week if they can win it. But if they can beat Scott Community, then they got to go and play either Andale or Cheney. And that's going to be a road playoff game for them if they play Andale. If they play Cheney, it'd be a home game because they're a higher seed as the 2 seed. Regardless, it's going to be a tough game regardless, but we've seen Shane Siebens' team really come together, especially with the injuries to Becker, to Mac Lee. Those have been the key losses for them, and yet they just continue to fight on with the play of a Gavin Rosa, the play of a Jordy Scott or a Zion Bell, the play on the defensive side of the ball, and that's a key thing to keep an eye on as Rock Creek at 8-1 coming in to this morning's matchup against Holcomb. Yeah, it's going to be an early one, but hopefully the guys got themselves ready and prepared, and, of course, Coach is always going to have these guys prepared. We'll take a quick look here at 2A. Humboldt, the top seed on the 2A Eastern portion of the bracket, taking down Riverton last night by a 64-7 final. They'll take on Council Grove, who picked up the, I guess you could call it, upset win over Silver Lake. Those two teams are pretty similar. Silver Lake at 7-2 coming in. Council Grove was 6-3. And Council Grove blows them out 30-8. We saw Silver Lake early in the year when they took on Riley County. Didn't matter. Council Grove was able to pick up the victory. Osage City remains unbeaten. They take down a very solid St. Mary's Ball Club, 14-0. Osage City at 10-0. And in the battle of those heated rivals, Nemaha Central and Sabetha, Nemaha Central prevails. 21-0, the victory for that team out of Seneca, Kansas. They'll take on Osage City next week in a very good matchup. 10-0 Osage City against a 9-1 Nemaha Central team. The Thunder take down the Blue Jays of Sabetha High School in a, once again, very highly contested and two teams that don't love each other very much rivalry that's been going on for many years in the state of Kansas. Southeast of Saline, the Trojans still unbeaten. They take down Norton in a ball game by the final of 34-7 in a game that was at Kansas Wesleyan University. They're going to take on Hoisington next week, who upsets Haven despite having the home playoff game. Hoisington a higher seed, and yet they beat an 8-1 Haven team by a 24-14 victory. So the Trojans will take on Hoisington next week in Gypsum in the sectional playoff game with a chance to go to sub-state. Garden Plain, meanwhile, they had to play their game at Cheney High School's field. Guess they had some weather issues over there, hence why they moved that game to 6 o'clock and had it over in Cheney. And Garden Plain beating Phillipsburg in a shutout, 28-0, and they'll take on a Beloit team who beat Halstead in a shutout, 28-0, as Garden Plain next week will hoist Beloit in an 8-2 matchup. There are some really good teams in the 2A bracket. You know, maybe keep an eye on that if your team is, you know, if you're in a situation, hey, interested to see what's going on in 2A. But, again, some really good matchups next week. The weakest record team is 6-4, and yet Hoisington, they just beat an 8-1 team at home, an upset win. You don't usually see that often in postseason, but it helps with those better district records and higher situations. But again, keep an eye again on B1047 today. Rock Creek and Holcomb. Yes, I am remembering the team name this time. I'm not blanking. Holcomb. Keep an eye on that. 10:30 pregame with kick at 11. Coming back next, we'll look at 1A plus 8-man football, previewing the rest of the matchups as we look ahead to next week and get you ready for the rest of your K-State Sports Saturday. That's coming your way next year on Scoreboard Saturday, powered by WTC Communications. We continue here on Scoreboard Saturday, final segment of the program on News Radio KMAN. K-State men's basketball coming up later on for you here on News Radio KMAN this afternoon. Cleveland State is the opponent. That's a 3 o'clock tip. Pregame beginning at 2 here on News Radio KMAN. Kim Commando, of course, following our program at 9, going until about noon. Interesting fact about Cleveland State, some of you may not know this. So Anthony Davis, who's with the Los Angeles Lakers, former New Orleans Pelican, when he was in high school in Chicago, and I am from Chicago, so I kind of remember this a little bit when he was in high school, Anthony Davis, the first school to recruit him, Cleveland State, yeah, when he was a real skinny point guard, and then he grew a bunch going into his senior year, and that's when he got all the recruiting letters and all the people trying to get him, and then ultimately ends up at Kentucky with Calipari, and they win a national championship. You know the whole story. They beat that team out east that we're not going to mention because, yeah, we don't mention that team out east much on this station unless they're playing K-State, and K-State football is beating them. Anyways, but yeah, Anthony Davis, one school was looking at him initially in high school, and it was Cleveland State University. Pretty interesting. I guess we could name a couple Cleveland State alums that folks might know really quickly, since we have a few minutes before we get you looking at 8-man and 1A and all that other stuff like that. Some of the alums that Cleveland State has, we can name a few here. Bunch of politicians. Trying to find some folks that people might know here from Cleveland State. Oh, well, I guess that segment. I guess I could name a couple. Marcia Fudge, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, a Cleveland State alum. And let's see here. Frank, people wouldn't know who that is. Interesting. Yeah, Marcia Fudge, Congressman Max Miller. Yeah, there's a few people on there. Leslie B. Wells, a judge. Norris Cole, former NBA player with the Miami Heat, was one who played at Cleveland State. Pretty good three-point shooter that they had there at Cleveland State. Anyways, K-State, Cleveland State, 2 o'clock pregame with tip at 3 here on News Radio KMAN. The great Wyatt Thompson on the call. A bit of a fill-in for him this week. Gets the off week with K-State football, but not so much with men's basketball. But still great to be able to hear Wyatt on the call. I'm sure we'll hear him on the way back from Flush following our football game, which is, of course, over on B1047. Quick look here at 1A. Unbeaten Jackson Heights takes down Troy last night in a 38-6 final. So unbeaten Jackson Heights takes on Rossville next week. Yes, the Bulldogs shut out McLeod 44-0. So it'll be a sectional battle between those two squads next week. St. Mary's Colgan defeating Riverside out in Pittsburgh last evening. That game got moved up to 6 o'clock. So St. Mary's will be taking on Centralia next week after St. Mary's won 19-0. Centralia beating Olpe 40-26. Those are a couple 9-1 ball clubs meeting up next week in Pittsburgh in a pretty good sectional matchup. Conway Springs downs Marion last evening by a 21-6 final. They'll take on Plainville next week. Plainville and Sedgwick will be the opponent next week. So very important ball game to keep an eye on heading into that ball game as they'll play Conway Springs, as I mentioned, who defeated Marion 21-6. Plainville winning 12-6 over Sedgwick. Hutchinson, Trinity Catholic, defeating Medicine Lodge Medicine Lodge wins by a final of 22-20. Got a little confused there by that. Medicine Lodge ends up winning their ball game over Trinity Catholic. They'll take on Valley Heights next week. Valley Heights defeating Sterling in a contest in Blue Rapids last evening, 25-19. So you look at a couple of unbeaten teams at the top, Jackson Heights and Conway Springs, the 1 seeds, continuing to hold on in 1A. Something to keep an eye on. 8-man 2, I'm just going to get it out of the way because we do it every single week with Axtell. 48 consecutive wins for the Axtell Eagles. They defeat Rural Vista 54-0 last night in regional action, and they'll take on Osborne next week, who beat Labo 44-8. That game was moved up an hour to a 6 o'clock kick. Central Christian and Logan Palco battling, couple 8-1 teams on Thursday night, and that one in Hutchinson, Central Christian gets the 48-6 victory. They're 9-1 now, and they're waiting to see if it'll be Wallace County or Victoria. They're playing a little bit later today because of weather last evening. That's a 2 o'clock kickoff in Victoria. Victoria's undefeated. They're 9-0. Meanwhile, Buckland, who's also unbeaten, they downed Hodgman County. A final score in that one, Hodgman County picks up the victory over Buckland 34-28. So Hodgman County beating an undefeated Buckland team on the road. Nicely done, folks. So the team out of Jetmore will take on Dighton next week, who defeated Argonia, who out of Attica, 30-16, the final score in that one. Something to keep an eye on next week. I got a 10-0 Dighton team who's going to be going on the road to play Hodgman County. Don't usually see a lot of unbeaten teams go on the road, but that's the way it's going to be. Axtell's got to go on the road to Osborne next week. Interesting. Definitely something to keep an eye on as Axtell looks to extend that winning streak, trying to make it a 4th straight 8-man championship for them in Division II. Frankfort, meanwhile, Nick Anderson's team has moved on to play Burlingame next week. Frankfort, the schedule's going to get tough for you here. Nick Anderson, their head coach, we'll be able to talk with him next week following that game. Frankfort, Burlingame, that's going to be a big, tough one for sure, but they're able to defeat Marmonton Valley out of Moran last evening, 46-0. So Frankfort goes on the road, picks up the win. They'll take on Burlingame, who beat Hanover 36-24. So definitely something to keep an eye on, folks, as we continue throughout the day here. We'll quickly look here. Whoops, clicked on the wrong button there. 8-man 1. Little River upsetting West Elk last night in Howard. Final score 34-14. So West Elk unbeaten. Their season comes to an end. Chase County, they lose to Central Plains in a shootout, 58-52. Nothing like those old-fashioned shootouts in 8-man football. El Saline, they lose to Madison. Another upset there. Very low-scoring game as Madison beating El Saline 14-12. Clifton Clyde is moving on. However, they'll beat Oswego 44-20, and they'll take on Madison next week. That'll be a road game for Clifton Clyde, even though they have the better record. South Central staying unbeaten, moves to 10-0. They beat Rollins County 24-6 last evening. Meanwhile, Hill City defeating Sublette 50-22. That will be a game in Hill City next week between South Central and Hill City. Big ball game to keep an eye on in that one with an unbeaten South Central team. And then Leote Wichita playing South Gray last night, and absolutely a complete blowout. Leote wins at 58-0. They'll take on unbeaten Hoxie, who shuts out Oxford 54-0. A big victory last evening for both those teams. So those two will meet next week in Leote for that ball game in the sectional playoffs. Folks, we got to get out of here. I got to head over to Rock Creek, of course. Hope to have some of you catch up with us on the game. And, of course, enjoy your Sports Saturday with K-State basketball and Cleveland State again. That's a 2 o'clock pregame, tip at 3 here on News Radio KMAN. Want to thank WTC Communications, of course, our great sponsor of this program. WTC, keeping you connected with the fastest fiber network internet speeds. Get your home or business in the game online at WTCKS.com. That's WTCKS.com. We'll see you again next week. Have a great weekend, and, of course, go Cats.